You're standing in a parking lot. Your phone buzzes. It's a text from your mechanic. $480 for the repair. When can you bring it in? And in that exact moment, before you even reply, something happens inside you. Either your thumb moves immediately, bring it in tomorrow, and you go back to whatever you were doing. Or you open your banking app, do the math 3 different ways, feel that familiar tightness in your chest, and start calculating which bill you can push to next week. Same text, same $480. $2 completely different humans, and here's the thing that should bother you. The person who flinched, they might make more money than the person who didn't. Because this test, the $500 test, has almost nothing to do with your income and almost everything to do with one number that most people can't name without pulling up their banking app first. That number is your net liquidity, not your salary, not your credit score. Not your 401k balance that you're not supposed to touch for 30 years. Your actual accessible deployable cash. The money that can move when life moves first. And it turns out there are specific thresholds on that number points where once you cross them, the entire experience of having money changes. Not gradually, not slowly. In ways you can feel on a Tuesday morning when nothing dramatic is even happening. My name is Mick. I spend probably too much time thinking about money, financial psychology, and specifically why two people with nearly identical financial situations can feel worlds apart. If you've ever looked at your paycheck and wondered why it never seems to translate into actual security, into that feeling that you're going to be okay, stick with me. Because today we're going to figure out exactly what the $500 test is really measuring, what it reveals about where you actually stand, and the specific steps that move you from one side of that test to the other. And I'll tell you right now, the answer is not earn more money. That's the wrong variable. We're going to talk about the right one. Let's start with what the $500 test actually is, because it's not just a thought experiment I made up for a YouTube video. Comes from real data. Every year, the Federal Reserve surveys tens of thousands of American households about their financial lives. And buried in that survey is one question that, more than almost any other, predicts how financially stable a household actually is. The question is simple. If you were faced with an unexpected expense of $400, would you be able to cover it using cash or savings? When they first started asking this question, the number was $400. They've since updated it to $500 to account for inflation. And the answers they get back are, depending on your perspective, either deeply alarming or deeply clarifying. In the most recent survey, roughly 37% of American adults said they could not cover a $500 emergency expense using cash or savings. Not 37% of people living in poverty. Not 37% of unemployed people. 37% of American adults broadly across income levels, across education levels, across every demographic. Now sit with that for a second. More than 1 in 3 people in one of the wealthiest countries on earth cannot absorb a $500 surprise without it cascading into a financial crisis. A car repair, a medical copay, a broken appliance, an unexpected vet bill. Any of these things that happen to everyone regularly on no particular schedule would send more than a third of the country scrambling. But here's what makes this number so interesting and so useful as a diagnostic tool. It's not really measuring poverty, it's measuring financial fragility. And financial fragility is not the same thing as having a low income. Here's what I mean by that. Let's talk about two people. We'll call them Dana and Marcus. Dana makes $58,000 a year. She's a dental hygienist in a mid-sized city. She's been at her job for 6 years, she likes it well enough, and she drives a 2017 Honda Fit with 90,000 miles on it that she owns outright. Her rent is $1,100 a month. She makes her own coffee, she cooks most of her meals, and she has exactly $8,400 sitting in a high-yield savings account that she added to automatically every single month for the past 4 years. She also has $14,000 in her 401k. If her car breaks down tomorrow and the bill is $500, Dana doesn't flinch. She pays it, she's mildly annoyed, and she moves on. The money is there. It was always going to be there. She built the system specifically so that number could never touch her. Now meet Marcus. Marcus makes $94,000 a year. He's in sales at a software company. He drives a 2023 F-150 that he's leasing. He lives in a nicer apartment than Dana, $1,950 a month. He has a gym membership he uses twice a week, a streaming bundle that costs more than he thinks about, and he goes out to eat more than he'd admit out loud. He has $340 in his checking account right now, a $6,000 balance on a credit card he's been meaning to pay down, and $9,200 in his 401k, which he thinks of as set it and forget it money that doesn't really count. Marcus makes $36,000 more per year than Dana, $36,000. And if his car needs a $500 repair tomorrow, Marcus has a problem, a real one. Not because he's irresponsible, not because he's dumb, not because he made catastrophically bad choices, but because the structure of his financial life was built around his monthly income, not around resilience. Every dollar that came in had somewhere to go. The truck, the apartment, the credit card minimum. The life he built to look like what $94,000 should look like. The $500 test isn't asking how much you make. It's asking, does your money have anywhere to stand when something goes wrong? Now let's talk about why this matters beyond just the emergency itself. Because the problem with failing the $500 test is not just the $500. That's actually the smallest part of it. There's a study I think about constantly. Researchers set up in a New Jersey shopping mall and recruited regular shoppers, not wealthy people, not poor people, just regular people going about their day. They asked half of them to imagine that their car had broken down and the repair cost $150. They asked the other half to imagine the same scenario, but with a $1,500 repair bill instead. Then, immediately after, they gave everyone a standard cognitive test, the kind that measures basic problem-solving ability, working memory, fluid intelligence. The wealthier participants in the study showed no difference between the $150 and the $1,500 scenario. Their scores were the same either way, but the lower-income participants who imagined the $1,500 repair, their scores dropped significantly, about a full standard deviation lower. And a full standard deviation on a cognitive test is, in the researchers' own words, comparable to losing an entire night of sleep. The same people. The same brains. The only thing that changed was 30 seconds of thinking about money they didn't have. Now here's what that actually means in your real life. If you are in Marcus's position, if you're someone who regularly does not have a clean answer to the $500 test, then some portion of your mental bandwidth every single day is being consumed by a background calculation. Can I cover this? What if something happens? How far away am I from a real problem? You're not consciously thinking about it every moment, but the calculation is running. It's using processing power, and every decision you make, every conversation you have, every risk you evaluate, every opportunity you assess is being filtered through a brain that is quietly slightly impaired. Not because you're not smart, because you're financially stressed, and financial stress is cognitively expensive. This is why the $500 test matters so much more than the $500. It's not a money problem, it's a mental bandwidth problem, a clarity problem, a capacity problem, and here's the brutal irony. The people who most need to make great financial decisions, people who are trying to climb out of financial fragility, are the exact people whose ability to make those decisions is most compromised by the stress of their situation. It's not fair. It's just how the brain works. Okay, so let's talk about what the test is actually measuring underneath the surface. Because once you understand the real variable, the path forward gets a lot clearer. The $500 test is measuring what I'd call your financial slack. Slack is a term borrowed from operations research. It refers to unused capacity in a system. The gap between how hard a system is running and its absolute limit. A system with no slack, a machine running at 100% capacity. A schedule with no buffer, a budget where every dollar is spoken for is a fragile system. One unexpected input, one disruption, one thing that doesn't go according to plan and the whole thing breaks down. A system with slack can absorb disruption. It has room. It bends without breaking. Most people build their financial lives with no slack. Every raise gets absorbed into a higher lifestyle. Every dollar gets a job. The budget is tight, efficient, optimized, and completely brittle, because efficient and resilient are opposites. The most efficient system is the one with no waste, no buffer, no room to breathe. And the most resilient system always has some waste built in, some room, some slack. The $500 test is asking, does your financial system have slack? And the reason so many people fail it, even people with high incomes like Marcus, is that they optimized for the wrong thing. They optimized for lifestyle, for the monthly payment that feels manageable, for the apartment that's a stretch but worth it. For the truck that makes them feel like the version of themselves they're working toward. They built a tight system, and tight systems break. Dana built a loose system, a deliberately inefficient one. She drives a paid-off Honda when she could probably afford a newer car. She lives in an apartment below her means. She cooks more meals than she wants to. And that inefficiency, that slack, is what makes her financially unbreakable in the face of a $500 bill. So now the question is, what does it actually take to pass the test? Not just barely pass it, to pass it with the kind of margin that changes how you feel on an ordinary Tuesday. There are 3 tiers of passing this test, and each one changes your experience of money in a different way. Asterisk tier 1, the $1,000 buffer asterisk. This is the absolute floor. The Federal Reserve's version of the test uses $400 to $500, but I want to push it slightly higher because life is slightly more expensive than surveys account for. Having $1,000 in a dedicated, untouched, boring savings account doesn't make you wealthy. It doesn't even make you financially stable in any lasting sense. But it does one specific and incredibly important thing. It breaks the cycle of debt. Here's what I mean. When you have zero buffer and a $500 surprise hits, you have 2 options. Option A, put it on a credit card. Option B, skip something else you owe. Most people choose option A because it feels like the least damaging choice in the moment. But what actually happens is that the $500 becomes $540, then $580, as interest accumulates while you're also trying to keep up with your regular expenses. The surprise doesn't get paid off, it just joins the pile of existing debt that grows faster than you can chip away at it. Having $1,000 in savings means option C exists. You just pay it and it's over. No interest, no compounding, no debt spiral. The crisis ends the day it starts. That sounds almost too simple to be meaningful, but the research is very clear on this. Having even $250 to $750 in liquid savings measurably reduces the likelihood of a household taking on new debt after an income shock or unexpected expense. The buffer doesn't eliminate the expense, it eliminates the cascade. If you are below this tier right now, this is your entire job. Not investing, not optimizing, not learning about index funds. Getting to $1,000 in a savings account that you treat as untouchable. That is the mission. Everything else is secondary. Asterisk asterisk tier 2. The 1-month buffer asterisk asterisk. This is where the test starts getting interesting. A 1-month buffer, meaning you have enough liquid savings to cover one full month of your essential expenses, changes something subtle but significant about how you experience work. Most people, when they have zero buffer, are essentially indentured to their next paycheck. Their employer doesn't have leverage over them in some dramatic, explicit way. But the leverage is real. If you can't skip a paycheck without things falling apart, then you cannot afford to take any action that risks the paycheck. You can't push back on something unreasonable your boss asks you to do. You can't say no to a project you know isn't right. You can't take the time to look for something better because looking for something better is a luxury you can't afford. 1 month of runway changes that calculus. Not dramatically, you're not in a position to quit and spend 6 months finding your dream job. But you can push back once. You can draw one line. You can afford to have one honest conversation with your boss without your stomach dropping through the floor. That sounds small. It is not small. The ability to say no, even once, even small, is the beginning of negotiating from something other than desperation. For most people, 1 month of essential expenses lands somewhere between $2,500 and $4,500 depending on their cost of living. This is your Tier 2 target. Asterisk asterisk Tier 3. The 3 to 6 month buffer asterisk asterisk. This is the level where the $500 test becomes completely irrelevant to your life. Not because $500 is trivial, it's still $500, but because the question of whether you can cover it has become so obvious that you stop asking it. 3 to 6 months of living expenses and liquid savings means you have passed through a psychological threshold that most people never cross. The Federal Reserve calls it financial resilience. Psychologists call it a reduction in scarcity mindset. I'd describe it more simply. Your brain stops running the background calculation. Think about what your mind does when you have 3 months of runway. A surprise expense hits, you cover it, you note that your buffer has dipped slightly. You make a mental note to replenish it over the next few months. And then you move on completely because the math works and you know it works. No chest tightness, no banking app math, no cascading decisions about which payment to defer. The crisis arrives, gets handled, and ends. For the average American household, 3 to 6 months of living expenses sit somewhere between $12,000 and $30,000 depending on lifestyle and location. This is the range where research consistently shows measurable improvements in reported financial well-being, not just security but actual well-being. Happiness, satisfaction, sense of control, not because $20,000 is a lot of money in absolute terms, but because it's enough slack in the system that the system stops feeling fragile. Now, I want to talk about the gap between knowing this and actually getting there. Because I think the reason most people stay stuck below Tier 1 isn't lack of information. It's something more specific. It's that the path to the buffer feels identical to the current situation for a really long time. You start saving $200 a month toward your $1,000 target. After 2 months, you have $400. After 3, $600. You're 5 months away from having a buffer, and during those 5 months, you're still failing the $500 test. The tightness is still there. The background calculation is still running. Nothing feels different yet, and this is the window where most people give up, not because they lack discipline, but because the reward for the behavior hasn't arrived yet, and the cost of the behavior, giving up $200 a month of spending, is immediate and visible and real. The academic term for this is hyperbolic discounting. We systematically overvalue rewards that are close in time and undervalue rewards that are farther away. A dollar today feels worth more than a dollar next month, even if logically they're the same dollar. So the $200 you could spend on something enjoyable right now feels more real than the $200 you're stashing in savings toward a buffer you won't feel for 5 months. The math says save, the brain says spend, and the brain wins most of the time. The way to beat this is to make the bridge shorter, not by finding a shortcut, there isn't one, but by engineering a smaller version of the reward that arrives sooner. Here's what that looks like practically. Instead of measuring your progress toward $1,000, measure your progress toward a smaller milestone that has a meaning attached to it. What's the smallest expense that currently stresses you out? For some people, it's a $100 car problem. For others, it's a $50 pharmacy bill. Name that number, make that your first checkpoint. The day you could cover that number without panic is the day you've earned your first small version of the feeling you're working toward. The full feeling comes later. But the first taste of it, that tiny quiet moment where you realize something that used to stress you no longer does, that's real. And that's enough to keep going. Let's talk about the system. Because talking about saving money without talking about the mechanics of how is like telling someone to lose weight without mentioning food or exercise. The what without the how is just motivational content that feels good for 20 minutes and changes nothing. here's the system that actually works. Not because it's clever or sophisticated, but because it removes the decision from the equation entirely. The decision is the problem. Every month that you tell yourself, I'll save whatever's left over at the end of the month, you are making the worst possible version of this bet. There is never anything left over, not because you're bad with money, but because spending expands to fill available income. This is not a character flaw. It's just how humans work when faced with available resources and an infinite menu of things to spend them on. The fix is automation. You move the savings before you ever see the money. Your paycheck hits your account. Within 24 hours, ideally the same day, a preset automatic transfer moves your savings contribution into a separate account. Not a different account at the same bank that's 2 taps away. A different bank. A high-yield savings account that is just annoying enough to access that you won't touch it on impulse. Now your checking account shows a lower number. And here's the thing about that lower number, you adapt to it completely within about 60 days. Your brain recalibrates. This is the new normal. The missing money stops feeling missing because it was never in the account you look at. This isn't a trick. It's just using the same adaptation mechanism, the hedonic treadmill that usually works against you, and flipping it in your favor. You adapted upward when your income went up and your spending followed it. You will adapt downward when your visible balance goes down and your spending follows it. The amount matters less than the automation. $100 a month automated is worth more than $300 a month that you intend to transfer manually when you remember to. Because you won't always remember, and you won't always feel like it, and some months something comes up. The automatic transfer doesn't have feelings. It just moves money. Now let's address something that I know is sitting in the back of your mind if you're watching this and your budget is genuinely tight. Because I can hear the objection forming. Mick, this is fine advice for someone who has money left over. I don't have money left over. My budget is already at zero, and I want to take that seriously. Because sometimes it's true. Genuinely structurally true. There are households where the math is so tight that the only path forward is increased income, not decreased spending, because the spending is already at bone. I'm not going to pretend that everyone can find $50 a month by cutting lattes, but I will say this and I want you to sit with it honestly. Most people's budgets, when they actually track them for 30 days, look somewhat different from what they imagine. Not always dramatically different. Sometimes the number is real. There's $20 a month that could be redirected, not 200. And $20 a month automated into savings grows slowly into something, into the first 100, into the first checkpoint. The other thing I'd say is this: the income side of this equation is real and it matters. If you're genuinely at the floor of what your budget can absorb, the $500 test is telling you something important about your income, not just your spending. And building toward more income, whether that's a second skill, a side project, a credential that opens a higher paying role, a negotiation for a raise you've been avoiding, that is also part of the answer. But the spending side almost always has more room than people think, because most people have never actually looked. Not estimated, not guessed, actually tracked, line by line for a real month. The tracking itself is often the revelation. Okay, let's come back to Dana and Marcus, because I want to show you what the next 5 years look like for each of them, and it's more interesting than you might think. Marcus keeps making $94,000. His truck lease comes up for renewal and he gets another one, newer model, similar payment. His credit card balance drifts to $9,000, then $11,000. He gets a $7,000 raise at year 3. The raise gets absorbed almost immediately. Nicer apartment, some home furniture upgrades, a vacation that he puts on the card. At year 5, his income is $101,000. His net worth is approximately $14,000, almost entirely in his 401k. His credit card balance is $12,500. He still fails the $500 test. Dana keeps making $58,000. She hits her $1,000 buffer in month 5. She barely notices the shift in the first month. By month 8, she realizes she hasn't thought about her checking account balance in 6 weeks. She keeps automating. She hits $5,000 at the end of year 1. At year 2, she starts contributing to her 401k more aggressively. At year 3, her company gives her a raise to $64,000. She doesn't change her lifestyle. The additional money goes to savings and investments. By year 5, Dana's income is $64,000. Her net worth is approximately $47,000, split between liquid savings and retirement accounts. She passes the $500 test so completely that the question feels almost quaint. Marcus earns $224,500 more than Dana over those 5 years. Dana's net worth is approximately $33,000 higher than Marcus's. Same test. Very different results. Here's what I want you to take away from all of this, and I want to say it plainly because I think it often gets buried in the math. The $500 test is not really about money. It's about how you experience your own life. It's about whether your brain is free to think about what you actually want to think about, or whether it's perpetually occupied by a low-grade financial emergency that hasn't happened yet but feels like it might. Passing the test doesn't make you wealthy. It doesn't solve all your problems. It doesn't mean you've made it or figured it all out. It means one thing: the next small financial surprise doesn't own you. And that one thing, that single shift in how much a $500 bill can disrupt your life, turns out to be the foundation that everything else gets built on, because here's what I've noticed. The people who build real wealth over time in an unglamorous and undramatic way, they almost all have one thing in common. Not a high income, not a secret investment strategy, not luck exactly. They built the buffer first. Before the investing, before the optimization, before the financial sophistication, they made themselves unbreakable to small surprises. And from that foundation, everything got easier. The $500 test is the beginning. Not the end, not the finish line, just the place where the ground stops shifting under your feet long enough for you to take the next real step. So here's what I want you to do after this video. Sit down with your actual numbers, not your estimated numbers. Your actual balance right now today. Ask yourself honestly, if $500 showed up unannounced right now, what happens? What does that moment feel like? If the answer involves any version of panic, scrambling, or cascading decisions, that's your number one financial priority. Not your index fund allocation, not your Roth versus traditional question, not which brokerage has the lowest fees, a $1,000 buffer automated in a separate high-yield savings account. Because until you can answer the $500 question with nothing, no reaction, no calculation, just a shrug and a payment, everything else you're trying to build has a crack in its foundation. And buildings with cracked foundations don't stand. They just fall more slowly than you expect. Get the buffer. Then build everything else. Asterisk, quick note before you go, nothing in this video is financial advice. I'm not a financial advisor. I'm someone who finds this stuff genuinely fascinating and tries to make it useful for people who weren't born into money and weren't handed a roadmap. Take what helps, ignore what doesn't, and talk to a real professional if you're making major financial decisions. Asterisk, if this changed how you think about the number in your account, drop a comment. Tell me where you are on the test right now. I read them.